Hello everybody, greetings and welcome to Chilliteracy. Happy Wednesday. How are we all doing? I see most people are some form of tired, which is fair. Same here. Angeline, I hope you get sleep. Don't feel like you have to stay up on our account. But also a green tea ice cream mochi sounds great. Aha! Happy birthday to Sam's account, indeed. Hello. But yes, hello everybody. I hope we are well. I hope those of you who have been having a great time watching Sam virtually fall off a skateboard. I hope that's been fun. And stab things with needles. Also, not in the same game. That could be interesting. What about Silk Song but on a skateboard? But yeah, I hope everybody has been having a decent day. And is ready for some spooks. Much entertaining violence was had. Was that Silk Song or was that Skate? Skate Song, yes. Because I feel like much entertaining violence does also encompass Skate. Both, yeah. But yeah, we've got some spookums for you tonight. Some more spooky little stories. Two of which I managed to find the text for. The third, as I've put in chat, definitely not looking at anyone in particular. Hi Andy. I've been trying to find text online, but I can only find actual books that one can buy. But yeah, the second story for tonight will hopefully be The Garden That Was Desolate by the wonderfully named Ulric Daubeny. What a name, right? But thanks Andy. But yeah, couldn't find it. Day hasn't happened yet. I hope it's good. Yes, well, I hope it is good when it happens. As it happens. You fixed one whole pocket out of loads of jeans that need functional pockets. Oh, jeans with functional pockets. Oh, that's yeah. That's the dream. But nice one for fixing a pocket. Excuse me. Oh dear. Wednesday. 'Tis the day I yawn, apparently. Do I have any exciting tales to tell of my week? Not really. I know I complained on one of Sam's streams. Was it on Friday? Maybe it's on Friday. Old sheets are good for extending pockets. Oh, I can imagine they are, yes. Yes, that I was playing at a wedding, and it sort of became revealed to me gradually that I wasn't just meant to be playing. They wanted me to sing as well. Oh, and also they wanted me to conduct. And then I turned up on the day before for the rehearsal, and they were like, "Right, over to you." And so I had to take the entire rehearsal, and then the rehearsal the next morning as well, which was a bit like, what? Like, I'm fine with it, but you possibly should have told me this earlier, and I would have, changed my fee accordingly. And I still haven't had a thank you from them. So that's my little rant rant of the week. Yeah, not great of them. No, I wasn't particularly enamoured. I mean, sure, basically there was someone who they're people I know because the mother of the bride was an old school teacher of mine. And the previous trumpet player, who'd been literally just playing for the entrance and exit of the bride, is someone I know from my time at the Royal Academy of Music, and he was a family friend, so he was doing it of the family, the bride's family. So he was doing it for free. And then he had to pull out, so they contacted me, and they're like, "Oh, by the way, we suddenly realised, oh yeah, that you'd be a good person to contact." I was like, "Oh, can you do this?" Yeah, no problem. Didn't tell me that he'd been doing it for free, but I was kind of suspicious that he had been anyway. But they offered to pay me and everything. I gave my usual wedding fee, and they were like, "Oh, that's a bit steep. Can we adjust it down?" I was like, "Yeah, sure, no problem." It's last minute. I'm just not doing anything on that day, so yeah, sure. And then it sort of became sort of like, "Oh, and by the way, we're down a tenor. Could you possibly sing the tenor part?" And I'm like, "Well, number one, I'm not a tenor, but it wasn't a low tenor part." So I was like, "Yeah, sure." We'd already agreed on fee at that point. I was like, "Yeah, that's fine. I mean, it's not going to be much." I didn't mind. and, oh, can you possibly just wave your arms occasionally from the side? It's like, yeah, okay, those things, fine. And then, yeah, it turned out that, no, actually, they wanted me to sing several bits. To give you an idea, so I'm just going to rant at you guys now, sorry about this. But to give you an idea, we did Franck, Panis Angelicus. Panis Angelicus. That one. For the bride walking in. And it was suddenly like, oh yeah, well the bridesmaids are going to be singing in the choir, so they won't be there, so we'll have like 3 women up there at the time at which they need to be singing their parts. So could you possibly sing the soprano part and conduct at the same time? It's like, yeah, that's fine, conducting and singing, same thing. And then it's like, ranting on stream, hold on, this is bit infringement, you're going to need to charge a fee. The fee is skateboarding videos or streams. It's a lot less fancy when you realise they're just saying angel bread. Yes, exactly. Yeah, Sam, you walked into that one, mate. Yeah, it was, that's not how that works. I think it is, you know. What was I going to say? Yes, so it was singing and conducting at the same time. Not a problem. Do it all the time. And then it was, oh, okay, so I'm playing, but you want me to play, you owe me, why would I pay you? Don't question it. Yeah, then it was, I need you to, we want the trumpet to play in canon with the choir, so basically the tenor part. Yeah. It was like, okay, so I'm singing and then I'm playing the trumpet. I can't conduct really whilst playing the trumpet, but you also want me to like do the writ at the end of and bring the choir off. So like I played the trumpety bit, and then as everybody was finishing, I'm still playing. I have to not swap hands, but you know, put the weight of my trumpet on the hand that doesn't usually take the weight, which is my right hand, and just conduct with my left hand, which is like very much not the hand I'm conducting with most of the time. Like one usually conducts with, you know, your dominant hand and does other things with your left. So yeah, that was interesting. It's like, okay, you're literally asking me to do three things at once here. And yeah, like I was conducting, but I could have said, yeah, sure, I'll conduct, and I could have no idea what I'm talking about when it comes to like taking rehearsals. Asking someone to conduct is not necessarily the same thing as, hey, we need you to be a choir director for today as well as a trumpet player. And it's like, I mean, obviously they knew, or at least someone around them knew, that I direct a choir and obviously know how to rehearse a choir, blah, 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 blah. I'm experienced in that regard, but that's not what they asked me to do until the day. And it was like, oh, yeah, you could have maybe told me that I was also going to be rehearsing the choir, because, you know, that should be an hourly rate. But anyway, I was somewhat miffed about it. Not okay to do, especially on short notice. I mean, again, I don't know what they would have done without me, because the previous trumpeter couldn't sing and also couldn't conduct, so they would have had to like hire an actual, you know, choir director. But they asked me pretty late in the day, like, I don't know, 3 weeks before or so, which is like, yeah, good luck getting a choir director. So yeah, it was all a bit weird, really. And yeah, I mean, again, they were very lucky that A, I have sung everything that they'd sung before. I know the pieces well. B, I know how to take a choir rehearsal. And C, I have taken choir rehearsals on shorter notice, frankly, of like turning up and, oh, no one's got a conductor here. Okay, I guess I'm conducting this. Like, yeah. And they're, oh, we don't know what we'd have done without you. It's like, no, I don't either. It's like, okay. And they also paid me on the day of the wedding. They paid me in the morning when I was at the wedding, basically. not in cash, obviously, like doing a bank transfer, which is also like, ooh, you didn't even give me time to talk to you afterwards and go, hey, so about my fee, what I did was a lot more than you asked for. So just like the whole thing was just like, ooh, you know what you've done, and it's not great, because they also haven't thanked me. It's like, oh, okay, nicely done. So, wait, what? Why was that message held? What the hell? Weird. But yeah, not cool. Was not particularly happy about that. But hey ho. Oh, because I had a link. No, it said it was held for race, ethnicity, or religion, which is weird. Was it something to do with US? We're not allowed to mention the US. I mean, fair enough. Yeah, weird. But yes, anyway, that was my little rant for you all. Apologies. But today we are going to be back on the spooky trail. If I can find the first story in this book. Non-US, that's anti-American. Yeah, exactly. Can't have that. And we're going to start tonight with we've got two shorter stories to start with, and then a slightly longer one for the second half. But gets here for one day and he's already imposing his will. I know, right? Non-us is them. Very good. But yes, if we are all sitting comfortably, and I do have the correct... Yes, I do have the correct text. We shall begin tonight's little list of short stories that I couldn't fit into the description because too many words. With, excuse me, The Mystic Tune by Mary Corelli. There are certain parts of the Western Hebrides where one may walk for many miles without meeting a human being, save, possibly, a solitary shepherd or belated fisherman tramping slowly homeward to some village hidden among the mist-crowned hills. It is easy to lose one's way, but more than difficult to find it, especially if, as is often the case, the eyes of the mind become bewildered by the weird and almost tragic beauty of the natural scenery. The very ability to think is, in a sense, hypnotized out of practical considerations into a passive state of dreamy sufferance. In such a condition one may wander far, almost unconscious of time or distance. And so it chanced to me one late summer evening, when, after a day of persistent rain and drifting mist, the clouds suddenly cleared, and the heavens seemed, as it were, torn open to display a wild glory of scarlet and gold flaring round the sinking sun. I found myself on the slope of a hill crowned with heather, glowing rose-purple in all the light flung broadcast by the western clearing of the sky, and all suddenly, as I stood watching the vibrating splendour, I heard the distant sound of a violin. The plaintive wail of the strings shivered through the air like the cry of a bird wounded in its flight, and I listened with a sense of pain that was akin to fear. For there was no one in sight. All the land lay bare and gleaming wet in the sunset glow, and on the sea there loomed a darkness of angry shadows contesting with broken teeth of white foam. But there was not a boat returning from the herring fishing, and not a sign of any habitation from which the call of the quivering strings could come. Still listening intently, I heard the music take a richer form. A tune of exquisite sweetness and irresistible appeal unfolded itself on the air like the petals of a flower, and its beauty enthralled me. I could not stay there on the hill and allow so divine and haunting a melody to escape me. I resolved that I must follow it and find the player. With this impulse upon me, I ran down the hill, and still continued running for a time, the magic tune still sounding and going on before me as a guide, though I knew not and thought not as to where it might lead me. The sun was slowly sinking, and I felt that soon I might be more a lost wanderer than before if darkness fell before I could discover any shelter. But the tune called me on, and its irresistible, melancholy sweetness filled my soul, leaving no room for prudence concerning my own personal guidance or safety. Breathless with running, I presently slackened my heedless pace through the wet heather which tangled itself about my feet, and contented myself with a steady rapidity of walking, which brought me to a narrow path winding across a moor. Here the tune seemed to grow louder and more persistent, and though I now begin to think it was a fantastic illusion of sound in my own imagination, I still went on, impelled almost unconsciously. All at once I perceived a small, dull light twinkling microscopically among the gathering evening shadows, and making my way toward it, I came close upon a crofter's cottage, set by itself, as it were, in a wilderness, the twinkling light gleaming like an eye from one opening of either a window or a door. As I quickened my steps and drew nearer, the tune came out, as it seemed, to meet me. It stretched its beautiful arms of melody forth to embrace and draw me to itself, and in the dying flares of the sunset I found I had reached my goal. The figure of a man, dimly silhouetted against the wall of the cottage, gradually took shape. A man playing a violin of exquisite tone and power. Such an instrument as any connoisseur would at once have envied. I checked myself in my hurried walk, and only ventured on, step by step, till I came within a few feet of the mysterious player who continued playing the same mysterious tune. There was still enough light in the sunset sky for us to see each other, and as I approached he looked at me without any apparent surprise or curiosity, drawing his bow across the strings with steady tenderness and purity. He had not the appearance of a native of the country. He wore the clothes of a man accustomed to cities and social observances, and his slim, well-poised figure gave an impression of athletic force and symmetry. I longed to speak, to ask if I might take shelter in the cottage, or haply find a guide to show me the way back to the village my walk had left so far behind me, but I dared not break the flowing of the tune. All at once a voice, low and penetrating, spoke to me across the swaying melody. "When she is asleep, I will come to you." I could not understand this, but was content to wait, and gradually my eyes, becoming accustomed to the shadows gathered round and about the cottage, were able to see a little through the open door. There, by the glimmering embers of a peat fire, sat a woman, deeply sunk in an armchair, her feet supported on a wooden stool, and her hands moving up and down rhythmically were beating mechanical time to the tune. I could not discern her features, but she seemed old and feeble, and the hands that never ceased their swaying motion were ghostly thin and spectral. I drew a few steps nearer the door and looked in more closely. There was something desolate and unearthly about that huddled figure, an embodied hopelessness, a helpless pitifulness that chilled my blood and filled me with awe as well as compassion. Surely, thought I, here was a human wreck cast aside and left to be broken up by the tide of cruel circumstance, and yet the tune. Like a living thing of tenderest sympathy, it caressed all the air round that lonely and aged creature, giving light, as it were, to the deepening darkness, and speaking in soft accents of wordless rhythm which suggested a speech higher than human. And while I waited, leaning against the open door and listening, a long, shivering sigh came breathing out on the air, and a faint, wailing voice murmured, "He does not sing it as he used to sing. There is something gone, gone, gone." The spectral old hands waved beseechingly and then fell inert. The tune, hovering in the evening mists like a winged creature, paused and seemed to tremble, then went on softly and yet more softly, while the player moved out of the shadows and, still playing, came to the door of the cottage and looked in. Watchfully he studied the huddled figure in the chair, drawing the bow delicately across the strings of his violin till the weary head fell back. Then, with another long sigh of exhaustion, all movement ceased, in a sleep that resembled more of a swoon than slumber. The player ceased, and the sudden silence in the darkening evening created a sense of such weird emptiness and desolation that it was almost unbearable. My eyes filled with tears, and I hesitated to speak. The man with the violin addressed me. "You have missed your way?" he asked gently. "I am sorry to have been so long without speaking to you, but I could not interrupt the tune until she slept." He waited, but still I could say nothing. He flicked a string or two of the violin with one finger half mechanically, and presently went on, "She lost her grandson in the war. He was a friend of mine, and he was all she had, a bright, handsome lad of great musical genius. The tune I played was his favourite tune. It is a very old Gaelic melody. He used to whistle it, and, above all, to sing it in a voice that would have made his fortune had he ever had the chance. He went out to Flanders as a gunner, and the very first day he took the field he was killed, just blown to bits like a handful of paper. She could never understand it. She does not believe he is dead. Since the armistice I have visited her regularly. She is all alone except for one woman of the moorlands who looks after her. All she cares for is the tune. I play it for her whenever I can." "And you?" I said at last. "You are no relation?" "No. I am a violinist by profession. I play in Paris, London, Berlin. You may have heard my name." He gave that name, one of the greatest renown in the European musical world. "Oh!" I exclaimed. "You are that wonderful genius! You—" He deprecated my enthusiasm by a slight wave of the hand. "Not at all," he said. "I am no genius, for I cannot even play the tune as he sang it." He bent toward the sad and aged figure in the chair. "Yes, she is fast asleep now," he continued, "and so she will forget, for a time. I have a professional engagement in Glasgow, and as long as it lasts I shall come and play to her in all my spare hours. It is the only thing I can do for his sake." He paused, then lay the violin down on a chair with the bow beside it. "Let me show you the way across the moor. You must have missed the direct path." "I followed the tune," I said. "It seemed to pull me toward it." He smiled gravely. "Yes? I am not surprised. It is a wonderful tune. It had its birth in the past, among the Highland bards of old, and no doubt it is weighted with many memories. But this last one is as poignant as any. Glorious and hopeful youth struck down by the devilish wickedness of war, leaving helpless old age desolate and broken-hearted. The governments of this world have much to answer for. The tune could tell them that its sorrow is only one of millions. We had walked away from the hut, and my companion put me on the straight road where I could see in the deepening shadows the twinkling lights of the little wayside hotel I had strayed from. I held out my hand, which he pressed warmly and kindly. "When I hear you play again at Queen's Hall," I said, "I shall know your heart is even greater than your genius. I shall think of your goodness and sympathy for this poor lonely old woman, and whatever you play, whether it be of Beethoven or any other great composer, I shall feel that the tune is your real masterpiece. The only masterpiece that is never mastered," he replied gently with a smile, "for it has the soul of the dead in its melody, and however well I may try to play it, I fail, for she will always say it is not as he sang it." The end. I really like that one. I really like the writing. Her writing is really gorgeous. Really, really nice. And, yeah. Musicians. They're good people. Usually. Most of the time. Although, frankly, a violinist playing outside in Scotland, I hope he's under some shelter. Never put a violin on a chair? Oh, violinists put violins on chairs all the time. Sometimes they fall off the chairs, but most of the time they're fine. That was nice. I know, it was like this is a sort of, haunted. It's meant to be like spooky stories, but that one's, yeah, as you say, Andy, it's got a dreamy vibe to it. It's just kind of like it's just really nice, really, really lovely. And yeah, no, it's good. I like it. I also appreciate the fact that the narrator is just like, "Ooh, that sounds like a good violin." Oh, excuse me. It's like, oh, nice, got a good ear. But yeah, that was that. What? You saw a YouTube short yesterday about the difference between a violin and a fiddle. First the guy played a little violin piece, then he poured beer over the violin and took off his shirt to play the fiddle piece. You nearly cried for the violin. I hope it was like a really cheap, like, Chinese violin, because my god. Yeah. Frankly, like, I have strong opinions, and I'm pretty sure you may have heard me say it before. I have very, very strong opinions on even a cheap instrument. Just don't. Nobody should be like destroying instruments in any way intentionally, because guess what? There's going to be someone who can't afford an instrument who could have done with that instrument, and you have just ruined it. And yeah, instruments, even cheap ones, they still take a lot of, work and resources and money put into them, especially string instruments. So yeah, instruments are still instruments no matter what, exactly. And they are the means by which a lot of people can have a lot of joy, and yeah, they are both a symbol and a tool, and we should absolutely respect that. You did play a recorder underwater, it was a plastic recorder. Oh, that wouldn't have hurt the recorder then, that's fine. If you're doing something silly with an instrument that's not actually damaging the instrument, go for it. That's what I do all the time. But yeah, like, you dealt with some pianos that were more trouble than they were worth. Yeah, it's fair enough. I mean, yeah, if something is like sort of beyond saving, then fair enough. But like, yeah, something that is that I think it's like anything that is if someone has bought like a cheap instrument that is new, it's like, why would you destroy a new instrument even if it's cheap? Just don't do that. That's just, yeah, that's just kind of wanton destruction, and frankly just burning money in the face of people who, might actually, want to play an instrument or want to do something musical. Yeah, stop wasting things. Exactly. You did fix a phone on top of your guitar recently? I mean, that doesn't sound like it would have damaged the guitar, so... even in fair working condition, you literally cannot give away a no-name upright piano. Oh, fair enough. Well, I don't know. I think you probably can. You've tried. Okay, fair enough. You've tried twice. Okay. Depends where you are, I guess. And, like, whether you know people. Pianos are difficult things. They are rather large. Yeah, kind of hard to give away. But yes. I liked that tune. That story. I liked the tune too. Yeah. We shall now continue with... Oh, actually, the next one is... You badly want a piano, but you haven't got room for one. There are, to be fair, there are some very good... there we go, I've pinned that. There are some very good keyboards and things that are a lot more, space efficient. But often, annoyingly, those come with price tags that are pretty much lined up with pianos. But yes, that was the nice little one. And now we're going back to spookums, because we've got to have some spookums. We are going to continue now with our next story for tonight. The Garden That Was Desolate by Ulric Daubeny. Such a good name. The country to the south of Birdlip, a Cotswold eyrie close on Roman Ermine Street, is, if scarcely wild, at least bleak, austere, and sparsely populated. It is a region of prehistoric burial mounds, of straggling British trackways, of Roman roads, Norman churches, ancient farm buildings, ruinous cottages, a dry wall country, sharply undulating, its bleak downs relieved by occasional secretive woods of larch or beech. In striking contrast is the Cotswold Edge, a precipitous drop of several hundred feet into the fertile Severn Valley, where a kaleidoscopic vista of irregularly shaped and party-coloured fields spreads out in a level tract for a distance of some 30 miles. Close to Birdlip, the high road skirts this edge, and there, for the space of several minutes, Philip Cranham lingered, watching the play of sunlight over the jagged chine of Malvern, pale and beautiful in the shimmering distance. What a position for a house, he mused, turning reluctantly and continuing at a brisk walk, for the air on these heights is chilly even towards the end of June. His way bore to the southwest, in the direction of the forgotten town of Painswick, which is probably not how you pronounce it, which was to be the last stage of his tour. A lover of the unconventional in walking, Philip deserted the usual high road through the woods, striking across a strip of common and over several fields until he met a narrow lane which promised to lead him in the right direction. Deeply rutted by former traffic, it was long since grass-grown, scattered with mossy boulders, and enclosed on either side by a straggling bramble hedge. A veritable picture of desolation, thought Philip, glancing uneasily at the approaching heavy clouds, for the tremulous mutter of thunder had assailed his ears, and he looked in vain for a place of shelter. This was an upper rampart of the Cotswolds, a ridge bleak and desolate, set apart from all things hospitable, where there was no course but to throw one's weight against the wind and face the threatened downpour. The lane, overgrown and seriolated, continued for some distance until, quite unexpectedly, the hedge was succeeded by a wall, dry built, as is the custom of the district, and strengthened by a massive cornice. Philip marvelled at its height, for it stood at least 12 feet. It looked to be of recent building, and still retained that bright cream colour peculiar to the local limestone when freshly dug. Near the middle, the wall was broken by a gateway, flanked by massive pillars, on which hung double doors, palpably amateurish in construction. One of these had been unhooked and dragged into the enclosure, where an elderly man was busy strengthening it with pieces of rough timber. "Afternoon," he volunteered, after a nervous scrutiny of Philip, who had come to a halt before the gateway. "Going to have a storm." He needed to be no prophet, for already great bloated drops of rain were falling, heralded by a resounding clap of thunder. Philip cast an apprehensive glance skywards and commenced to unstrap his mackintosh. "Yes, we are in for it," he agreed, with the pointed addition, "unpleasantly exposed up here, not even a decently thick hedge to shelter under." There was a noticeable hesitation before the stranger answered, and when he did, it was with a certain shy reluctance. "Come inside. You can shelter in my room until the rain stops." Philip required no second bidding. 6 steps, and he was viewing an extensive garden, consisting first of a rough lawn, backed by currant and gooseberry bushes, young fruit trees, a yew hedge industriously trimmed, and then diverse beds and footpaths disappearing over the sloping hillside. Signs of any habitable building there were none. "Come along," enjoined the stranger, advancing hastily across the spacious lawn. "I live over there in the lookout post." For the first time, Philip noticed, built against and forming part of the left-hand boundary wall, a kind of miniature watchtower with pyramidal stone roof terminated by a central chimney. A flight of steps led them to the doorway, for the place was built upon a mound with floor level halfway up and sloping roof considerably above the wall. Within there was a single room, possibly 12 feet square, having a fireplace in one corner, a narrow window cut through the outer wall, and another, a very large one, facing down the garden and over the lovely Vale of Severn. "What a glorious view!" exclaimed Philip, despite himself. Damned view! Wish I had never set eyes upon it." Philip turned in open-mouthed astonishment, but his companion paid no heed, though he continued in a quieter tone. "I'm a slave to that view. I can sit and look at it for hours. I worship it, yet all the while I hate it. Like to hear the story of all this?" With rather an abandoned gesture, he swept his hand about to indicate the tiny house, the garden, and the towering outer walls. "I should like to know why there are immensely high walls on 3 sides, or rather 2, for the third is incomplete, and yet—" "To keep out undesirables, my dear sir, to keep out undesirables," interrupted the stranger with uncontrolled impatience. "The walls and the tall gates, which I am busy strengthening." "But, excuse me," continued Philip, obstinately bent on satisfying his curiosity, "the third wall, as I say, is but partially built, while no barrier of any kind protects the bottom of the garden." A long silence ensued, broken only by the drumming of the rain upon the unsealed roof, and an occasional echoing burst of thunder. Philip lounged thoughtfully near the open window, while his companion stood irresolute, chewing at his moustache, and with close-knit brows, as if striving to recapture some elusive or forgotten memory. Presently his expression cleared, and as quickly changed to one of crafty eagerness. Come, sir, come. You cannot expect everything all at once. Do you know every stone of those walls, yes, even of this house, I built myself?" Philip nodded encouragingly. At times the man seemed sane enough, and yet he was decidedly peculiar. "The reason for all this," he continued, repeating the gesture which embraced the whole of the surroundings and ended with the larger window, "the reason of it all is that the view. More than 7 years ago I camped here, while on a holiday from London,
After all the noise and smoke and racket, this place seemed like paradise. And the view, I could simply not tear myself away. It ended in my purchasing the land, for I had determined to erect a house here. There was some trouble with a woman who held part as an allotment and claimed the place as hers, but she could produce no legal title, so the lawyer and I bundled her out between us. Vindictive old harridan she was. He ceased abruptly, creeping across to the rickety door, which he slowly opened, and, after a stealthy glance around, closed with an exclamation of relief. Philip watched narrowly. The manner was so ridiculously furtive as to point without a doubt to lunacy. It was becoming distinctly creepy, this sheltering from a thunderstorm in the cottage of a maniac. "Where was I?" the man resumed, seating himself by the empty fireplace. "What? Yes. I had determined, as you say, to build a house here. 7 years ago it was, this very day, that 6 labourers commenced to turn the sods for the foundations. A month later, I was all alone. Nobody would work for me, though I had men up from Stroud, Gloucester, Cheltenham, finally from London. Will you credit me when I tell you that the beastly old hag who claimed the place had frightened them all away? I admit that there were several distressing accidents. The first day, a man was bitten by an adder, and another crushed between a heavy stone cart. The Cheltenham foreman tripped up in a rabbit hole and broke a leg, and his successor suddenly went mad. But fools, idiots, they actually believed the crude tales of the country folk who said that the ranting old woman was a witch. They took to their heels and ran, the dirty cowards."
"What happened after that?"
"They left me to build the house as best I might, and build it I swore I would, in face of Beelzebub. Witch or no witch, she did not frighten me, though often enough she came and threatened, yes, cursed and threatened, so I started right away to build the highest wall I could to keep her out."
"Has it taken 7 years to do all this?"
"Yes. I could only build at intervals, for the garden had to be planted, and I practically live on its contents. In 2 years' time I hope to have the defensive walls completed, and then the ill-omened old hag will be shut out from my property forever."
"But pardon me once more," insisted Philip, bent on settling the question of the stranger's sanity. "Why did you not run up a medium wall all round, sufficient to exclude unwelcome visitors, and then raise and strengthen it at your leisure?" The recluse made no reply. Instead, he sprang towards the door, tore it open, and halted on the threshold, quivering with rage. Facing him was a wizened, bent old woman, clad in an assortment of dirty rags, leaning heavily upon a stick. Her face was stained and wrinkled like a winter walnut, and inexpressibly malignant was the look that shot from beneath the overhanging eyebrows.
"What is it, you old devil?" choked the man, his voice pitched high in apprehension. "Why do you stand gibbering me like that?"
She made no immediate answer, but pointing a skinny talon, uttered a husky chuckle.
"Ha ha! Ralph Cook! What did I tell 'ee? What did I tell 'ee these 7 years agone?" "Stand back there! Stand back! Don't you dare to molest me, woman!" "Why don't ye answer, Ralph Cook? Is it that ye are afeard, or it be that ye don't remember? 7 years I give thee, 7 years. I said, and then, are ye leaving, Ralph Cook? Leaving here this very day?" "No, you old fool! You won't frighten me by your threats and curses. I bought this land and paid for it, and by glory, I mean to stay here in face of you or anybody." "Then, Ralph Cook, by all the powers—"
Her arms were raised in vehement imprecation, but before the words could leave her lips, the man had dealt her a smashing blow across the face.
She swayed helplessly for a moment, and then staggered backwards, falling heavily to the ground. A sudden vivid flash of lightning transfixed the two men, but as the echoes of the thunder died away, Philip pushed through the open doorway and bounded down the steps. One glance was sufficient to convince him that the old woman's neck was broken. Awe-stricken by the sight, he looked back to meet a pair of fiend's eyes, madman's eyes, homicidal maniac's eyes. Then blank, unreasoning panic overtook him. He fled blindly, in his terror taking what appeared to be a different route across the garden. Here the grass grew rank, a yew hedge was pitifully unkempt, the fruit trees were old and straggling, the pathway all but indistinguishable. At last the boundary wall, but it was stained by the flight of many winters, and near a crumbling gateway lay one wooden door, rotting amid the weeds, while the other hung perilously upon its rusted hinges. When at last he checked his pace, Philip found himself in the grass-grown lane, and on looking back, felt relieved that the walls of the accursed garden were no longer visible. With the memory so fresh upon him, Philip's judgment lost its normal balance. To witness, perhaps in some measure to be a mute accomplice in the murder of an old woman by a maniac, might well upset the strongest nerves, and he could not forget that his own life must have hung in fearful jeopardy. So alarming was the thought of giving evidence in the witness box that by the time Philip had reached Painswick he was fully determined to say no word to the police. Instead, he gave himself to headlong flight, catching the late motor bus to Stroud and the evening train to London. Months went by, but although he kept in anxious touch with local news, no hint came that the murder had been detected. At times Philip suffered considerable pangs of conscience, and on more than one occasion he was on the point of going to the police, only to be deterred by the anticipation of considerable official censure for so long concealing knowledge of the crime. Later, his engagement and then the happiness of marriage put a period to further vain recriminations, but the memory of that awful afternoon, a secret even from his wife, was seldom from him. 2 years passed before he again set foot in Cotswold, this time with his wife and sister, viewing the romantic beauty of the district from a comfortable motor. It had been entirely Philip's proposition, this revisiting of scenes with which he had been familiar since his youth, and if the suggestion had not entirely sprung from sentiment, the other reason was such that he refused to admit it, even to himself. It fell out that they stayed a while at Painswick, and then it was that Philip, throwing further self-deception to the winds, determined to satisfy his pent-up curiosity. Explaining that he wished to make inquiries of an old acquaintance, they one day motored over, approaching the garden from the direction by which he had so precipitately left it. A passable road led past the entrance to the grass-grown lane, and there, near a cottage, they drew up. Philip, in a happy moment of inspiration, crossed to the cottage, with a view to making some discreet inquiries. A typical Cotswold woman answered to his knock, tanned and healthy, but prematurely grey. "Good afternoon," he greeted her. "Can you tell me anything about the house? That is, the garden up the lane. Mr. Ralph Cook, I think, was the owner's name," he added, seeing that the woman preserved a stolid silence. "I'll ask father to come," she answered, regarding him with questioning eyes. "Will you step inside, sir?" Philip followed into the neatly furnished parlour, and was presently joined by a corduroyed rustic, very old and lame. "Ralph Cook?" repeated the latter, on becoming acquainted with the business. Yes, sir, I can tell 'ee summat about he, to be sure I can. Ralph Cook, a Cook's Folly we called un. Aye, and fool he were right enough when he tried to be upsides of Mother Gaskin. 'Twere a bad day for he when he went up there, sir, and no mistake. Not but what I allus said as how...
Is the building complete? Ventured Philip, breaking in upon the old fellow's ponderous garrulity. Are the walls finished?
No, of course not. She see to that, bless 'ee. Why, I can yet mind the day, sir, when he began a building. 6 men he brought with un, and what of that? One were crushed beneath a wagon, another broke his leg, the foreman... Yes, I know about that. What I really wanted to ask was of Mr. Cook himself. Is he still living there? The old man glared at Philip in open-mouthed astonishment. Still there? He at last gasped. Lord sakes, and he old enough to be me own feyther when he came more than 40 years back. What do you mean, 40 years? Mr. Cook told me that he had been there about 7. He told you? Yes. Don't you understand? I was here the summer before last and had a long conversation with him. Instead of making a direct reply, the old man shuffled to the door and called his daughter. His voice was distinctly tremulous when he began to question her. Polly, can ye mind the time when Ralph Cook were a-living up with a Folly? Why, no, father, she replied, obviously puzzled. You know I wasn't born then, not till several years later. Ah, ye be 34 now, bain't ye? This here gentleman... But no matter, Polly, ye can run along. Left alone, the 2 men regarded each other in moody silence. What became of him? Asked Philip presently. Hung hisself. Leastways so 'twere said, but people do hold as how Mother Gaskin did it for un. She allus was a rum one, was Mother Gaskin. Folks don't rightly know what became of her, though some vows she went off riding upon her broomstick and got took up into the moon. Of course that bain't rightly possible, leastways, not to my way of thinking. There was no more to be learnt, so Philip, curiously unconvinced, hurried back towards the motor. This was empty, and realizing that the girls had wandered off alone, he decided to seize the opportunity and put an end to further doubt by private personal investigation. Accordingly, he set off up the lane, ruminating all the while on the extraordinary tales he had just heard. Could the old man have been weak-witted, and was he backed up by his daughter merely to preserve appearances before a stranger? It seemed quite probable, more probable than that he must disbelieve the evidence of his own senses. Yes, of course, how could he have doubted? There, ahead of him, stood the garden wall, bright and new-looking, and the massive dry-built gateway with one door still unhooked. A few steps more, and he had come to a standstill before the familiar entrance. Afternoon, greeted an elderly man who was at work mending the dismantled gate with pieces of odd timber. Going to have a storm. A heavy echo of thunder came, as if to confirm his supposition, and then the rain began to fall in isolated, swollen drops. Yes, we are in for it, Philip found himself repeating, as a person in a dream. Unpleasantly exposed up here, not even... Then he was running, racing madly away from the accursed spot. Horror in its most primitive form pursued him, and he fled until, soaked with perspiration and painfully short of breath, he found himself clambering on board the waiting motor. Presently his wife and sister came into view, approaching from the entrance to the grass-grown lane. Both were somewhat breathless and a trifle pale. "Oh, Philip," the former panted as soon as they had reached the motor. "We found such a horrid place. Joyce suggested walking up that lane just to see where it led, and we came across a kind of deserted garden, surrounded by enormous walls. They looked old and dilapidated, and there was a tumbled-down gateway. Oh, all so sad and dreary. Everything inside was wild and overgrown, and there was a curious little house built against the wall, which looked as if it had not been touched for years. Suddenly, as we were wandering around, we both had an impression that somebody was watching us. I don't know why, but it quite gave us the horrors, and we simply had to run. What is the matter, dear? You look quite ill." "Oh, nothing. Perhaps the thunder. It was quite a heavy clap." "When? We heard nothing. Have you seen your friend?" "Yes, no, I mean, he has left this neighbourhood. Shall we be making a move homewards?" The end. I hope you enjoyed that one. I enjoyed that one. I quite like the idea of, like, there's just a random little sort of time loop thing, but only certain people get stuck in it. And the fact that not only does he repeat what he said the first time, but it's written exactly the same as well. The whole kind of "afternoon," said an old man who was doing this, who was fixing up the gate. Like that whole little paragraph is exactly the same as it's written earlier in the story. It's like, oh, that's a nice little literary device there. It's just like, hang on a second, we've been here before. Yeah. Quite like that. I quite like the implications as well. It's just like, is it ghosts? Is it a little sort of mini sort of copy paste away? Yeah. Is it that like the witch has somehow trapped this guy's soul in a day he's forced to repeat and repeat and repeat? Who knows? But also, don't kill old women, even if you think they're witches. Because frankly, you know what? It was kind of her place in the first place. She'd probably lived there for a while. So yeah. Prehistoric burial mounds. I wonder why this story got picked. Yeah, I mean that was in like the first like 3 sentences. I was like, ooh, but unfortunately, it's got nothing to do with the rest of the story. I was like, damn. But yeah, I liked that one. That was good. Oh, excuse me. Violin and burial mound. Don't you dare, Arian. No. This is not Hobbs Barrow. Anyway, that is where we shall take a break. So, yes, go do break-related things, and we shall see you back in about 5 minutes. Bye for now.
Welcome back, everybody, from the break. I hope we have had a good break. I have drunk some water. That is all I have done. Yeah. Yeah, I don't really have anything else to say. Apart from, I forgot to say actually, was it him or was it? The author for this last one, Ulric Daubeny, again, fantastic name. Was it him? Hang on. Yes. Gotten halfway home from the bus stop. Ah, nice. So Ulric Daubeny did not only just have a fantastic name. Sadly, he died at 34, which sucks. But if Sam's here, by the way, we should look him up and read more of his stuff actually, because aside from one, there's a little blurb here. Aside from one other known supernatural tale, The Elemental contains all of his weird fiction, including his most read story, The Sumac, a botanical spin on the vampire legend, which sounds intriguing. So we should probably look that up. The Elemental. But also this amuses me greatly. An academic who wrote on the history of woodwind instruments and Cotswold churches. I was like, that's two choices of things to write about. Nice. Yeah, quite like it. Oh, that's a full book you linked. Oh yes, it was nice. So yeah, we should probably see if there's any good things on that. But botanical spin of the vampire sounds kind of interesting. If you don't mind reading online, we probably will just buy the book, knowing us, because we are old-fashioned like that. But yeah, just an academic who wrote on the history of woodwind instruments and Cotswold churches. It's like, it's a good choice of two things to write on the history of. So yeah. Right. Skibbity-bop-de-boo. There we go. Right. We've had... Do they turn into a Venus flytrap instead of a bat? Venus flytrap? Doesn't quite have the same ring as bat, but you know. We've had a nice, fairly wholesome story about a fiddler. Well, violinist, I should say. We've had a slightly spooky story about gardens. Now we got an even spookier story. Involving murder. And the Lake District. Less, but kind of cool. And also another good named author here. So yeah, if we are... Oh, this is another humorist also, Sam. The author here, John Kendrick Bangs, which is a brilliant name. A satirist, so might also possibly be... another kind of Twain-esque person. Who knows? Strange Horticulture was indeed set in the Lake District. You are correct. So yes, if we're all sitting comfortably, we will continue tonight with Carleton Barker, First and Second, by John Kendrick Bangs. Chapter 1. My first meeting with Carleton Barker was a singular one. A friend and I, in August 1850, were doing the English Lake District on foot, when, on nearing the base of the famous Mount Skiddaw, we observed on the road, some distance ahead of us, limping along and apparently in great pain, the man whose subsequent career so sorely puzzled us. Noting his very evident distress, Parton and I quickened our pace and soon caught up with the stranger, who, as we reached his side, fell forward upon his face in a fainting condition, as well he might, for not only must he have suffered great agony from a sprained ankle, but inspection of his person disclosed a most extraordinary gash in his right arm, made apparently with a sharp knife, and which was bleeding most profusely.
To staunch the flow of blood was our first care, and Parton, having recently been graduated in medicine, made short work of relieving the sufferer's pain from his ankle, bandaging it about and applying such soothing properties as he had in his knapsack. Properties, by the way, with which, knowing the small perils to which pedestrians everywhere are liable, he was always provided. Our patient soon recovered his senses and evinced no little gratitude for the service we had rendered him, insisting upon our accepting at his hands, merely, he said, as a souvenir of our good Samaritanship, and as a token of his appreciation of the same, a small pocket flask and an odd diamond-shaped stone pierced in the centre, which had hung from the end of his watch chain, held in place by a minute gold ring. The flask became the property of Parton, and to me fell the stone, the exact hue of which I was never able to determine, since it was chameleonic in its properties. When it was placed in my hands by our grateful patient, it was blood-red. When I looked upon it the following morning, it was of a livid, indescribable hue, yet lustrous as an opal. Today it is colourless and dull, as though some animating quality that it had once possessed had forever passed from it. "You seem to have met with an accident," said Parton, when the injured man had recovered sufficiently to speak. "Yes," he said, wincing with pain. "I have. I set out for Saddleback this morning. I wished to visit the Scales Tarn and get a glimpse of those noonday stars that are said to make its waters lustrous, and to catch the immortal fish?" I queried. "No," he replied with a laugh. "I should have been satisfied to see the stars, and I did see the stars, but not the ones I set out to see. I have always been more or less careless of my safety, walking with my head in the clouds and letting my feet look out for themselves. The result was that I slipped on a moss-covered stone and fell over a very picturesque bit of scenery onto some more stones that, unfortunately, were not moss-covered." "But the cut in your arm," said Parton suspiciously. "That looks as if somebody else had given it to you." The stranger's face flushed as red as could be, considering the amount of blood he had lost, and a look of absolute devilishness that made my flesh creep came into his eyes. For a moment he did not speak, and then, covering the delay in his answer with a groan of anguish, he said, "Oh, that, yes, I did manage to cut myself rather badly, and—" "I don't see how you could, though," insisted Parton. "You couldn't reach that part of yourself with a knife if you tried." "That's just the reason why you should see for yourself that it was caused by my falling on my knife. I had it grasped in my right hand, intending to cut myself a stick, when I slipped. As I slipped, it flew from my hand, and I landed on it, fortunately on the edge and not on the point," he explained, his manner far from convincing, though the explanation seemed so simple that to doubt it were useless. "Did you recover the knife?" asked Parton. "It must have been a mighty sharp one, and rather larger than most people carry about with them on excursions like yours." "I am not on the witness stand, sir," returned the other, somewhat petulantly, "and so I fail to see why you should question me so closely in regard to so simple a matter, as though you suspected me of some wrongdoing." "My friend is a doctor," I explained, for while I was quite as much interested in the incident, its whys and wherefores, as was Parton, I had myself noticed that he was suspicious of his chance patient, and seemingly not so sympathetic as he would otherwise have been. "He regards you as a case." "Not at all," returned Parton. "I am simply interested to know how you hurt yourself, that is all. I mean no offence, I am sure, and if anything I have said has hurt your feelings, I apologise." "Don't mention it, Doctor," replied the other with an uneasy smile, holding his left hand out towards Parton as he spoke. "I am in great pain, as you know, and perhaps I seem irritable. I'm not an amiable man at best. As for the knife, In my agony I'd never thought to look for it again, though I suppose if I had looked I should not have found it, since it doubtless fell into the underbrush out of sight. Let it rest there. It has not done me a friendly service today, and I shall waste no tears over it."
With which effort at pleasantry he rose with some difficulty to his feet, and with the assistance of Parton and myself walked on and into Keswick, where we stopped for the night. The stranger registered directly ahead of Parton and myself, writing the words Carleton Barker, Calcutta, in the book, and immediately retired to his room, nor did we see him again that night. After supper we looked for him, but as he was nowhere to be seen, we concluded that he had gone to bed to seek the recuperation of rest. Parton and I lit our cigars, and, though somewhat fatigued by our exertions, strolled quietly about the more or less solemnant burg in which we were, discussing the events of the day, and chiefly our new acquaintance.
"I don't half like that fellow," said Parton, with a dubious shake of the head. "If a dead body should turn up near or on Skiddaw tomorrow morning, I wouldn't like to wager that Mr. Carleton Barker hadn't put it there. He acted to me like a man who had something to conceal, and if I could have done it without seeming ungracious, I'd have flung his old flask as far into the fields as I could. I've half a mind to show my contempt for it now by filling it with some of that beastly claret they have at the table d'hote here, and chucking the whole thing into the lake. It was an insult to offer those things to us."
"I think you are unjust, Parton," I said. "He certainly did look as if he had been in a maul with somebody. There was a nasty scratch on his face, and that cut on the arm was suspicious, but I can't see but that his explanation was clear enough. Your manner was too irritating. I think if I had met with an accident and was assisted by an utter stranger who, after placing me under obligations to him, acted towards me as though I were an unconvicted criminal, I'd be as mad as he was. And as for the insult of his offering, in my eyes that was the only way he could soothe his injured feelings. He was angry at your suspicions, and to be entirely your debtor for services didn't please him. His gift to me was made simply because he did not wish to pay you in substance and me in thanks. I don't go so far as to call him an unconvicted criminal, but I'll swear his record isn't clear as daylight, and I'm morally convinced that if men's deeds were written on their foreheads, Carleton Barker, Esquire, would wear his hat down over his eyes. I don't like him. I instinctively dislike him. Did you see the look in his eyes when I mentioned the knife?"
"I did," I replied, "and it made me shudder."
"It turned every drop of blood in my veins cold," said Parton. "It made me feel that if he had had that knife within reach he would have trampled it to powder, even if every stamp of his foot cut his flesh through to the bone. Malignant is the word to describe that glance, and I'd rather encounter a rattlesnake than see it again." Parton spoke with such evident earnestness that I took refuge in silence. I could see just where a man of Parton's temperament, which was cold and eminently judicial even when his affections were concerned, could find that in Barker at which to cavil, but for all that I could not sympathise with the extreme view he took of his character. I have known many a man upon whose face nature has set the stamp of the villain much more deeply than it was impressed upon Barker's countenance, who has lived a life most irreproachable, whose every act has been one of unselfishness and for the good of mankind, and I have also seen outward appearing saints whose every instinct was base, and it seemed to me that the physiognomy of the unfortunate victim of the moss-covered rock and vindictive knife was just enough of a medium between that of the irredeemable sinner and the sterling saint to indicate that its owner was the average man in the matter of vices and virtues. In fact, the malignancy of his expression when the knife was mentioned was to me the sole point against him, and had I been in his position I do not think I should have acted very differently. though I must add that if I thought myself capable of freezing any person's blood with an expression of my eyes, I should be strongly tempted to wear blue glasses when in company or before a mirror. "I think I'll send my card up to him, Jack," I said to Parton when we had returned to the hotel, "just to ask how he is. Wouldn't you?" "No," snapped Parton, "but then I'm not you. You can do as you please. Don't let me influence you against him, if he's to your taste." "He isn't at all to my taste," I retorted. "I don't care for him particularly, but it seems to me courtesy requires that we show a little interest in his welfare." "Be courteous, then, and show your interest," said Parton. "I don't care, as long as I am not dragged into it." I sent my card up by the boy, who, returning in a moment, said that the door was locked, adding that when he had knocked upon it there came no answer, from which he presumed that Mr. Barker had gone to sleep. "He seemed all right when you took his supper to his room?" I queried. "He said he wouldn't have any supper, just wanted to be left alone," said the boy. "Sulking over the knife still, I imagine," sneered Parton. And then he and I retired to our room and prepared for bed. I do not suppose I had slept for more than an hour when I was awakened by Parton, who was pacing the floor like a caged tiger, his eyes all ablaze, and labouring under an intense nervous excitement. "What's the matter, Jack?" I asked, sitting up in bed. "That damned Barker has upset my nerves," he replied. "I can't get him out of my mind." "Oh, pshaw," I replied. "Don't be silly. Forget him." "Silly?" he retorted angrily. "Silly? Forget him? Hang it, I would forget him if he'd let me, but he won't." "What has he got to do with it?" "More than is decent," exclaimed Parton. "More than is decent. He has just been peering in through that window there, and he means no good." "Why, you're mad," I remonstrated. "He couldn't peer in at the window. We are on the 4th floor, and there is no possible way in which he could reach the window, much less peer in at it." "Nevertheless," insisted Parton, "Carleton Barker, for 10 minutes previous to your waking, was peering in at me through that window there, and in his glance was that same malignant, hateful quality that so set me against him today. And another thing, Bob," added Parton, stopping his nervous walk for a moment and shaking his finger impressively at me, "another thing which I did not tell you before because I thought it would fill you with that same awful dread that has come to me since meeting Barker. The blood from that man's arm, the blood that stained his shirt-sleeve crimson, that besmeared his clothes, spurted out on my cuff and coat sleeve when I strove to stanch its flow." "Yes, I remember that," said I. "And now look at my cuff and sleeve," whispered Parton, his face grown white. I looked. There was no stain of any sort whatsoever upon either. Certainly there must have been something wrong about Carleton Barker. Chapter 2. The mystery of Carleton Barker was by no means lessened when next morning it was found that his room not only was empty, but that, as far as one could judge from the aspect of things therein, it had not been occupied at all. Furthermore, our chance acquaintance had vanished, leaving no more trace of his whereabouts than if he had never existed. "Good riddance," said Parton. "I am afraid he and I would have come to blows sooner or later, because the mere thought of him was beginning to inspire me with a desire to thrash him. I'm sure he deserves a trouncing, whoever he is." I, too, was glad the fellow had passed out of our ken, but not for the reason advanced by Parton. Since the discovery of the stainless cuff, where marks of blood ought by nature to have been, I goose-fleshed at the mention of his name. There was something so inexpressibly uncanny about a creature having a fluid of that sort in his veins. In fact,
So unpleasantly was I impressed by that episode that I was unwilling even to join in a search for the mysteriously missing Barker, and by common consent Parton and I dropped him entirely as a subject for conversation. We spent the balance of our week at Keswick, using it as our headquarters for little trips about the surrounding country, which is most charmingly adapted to the wants of those inclined to pedestrianism, and on Sunday evening began preparations for our departure, discarding our knickerbockers and resuming the habiliments of urban life, intending on Monday morning to run up to Edinburgh, there to while away a few days before starting for a short trip through the Trossachs. While engaged in packing our portmanteau, there came a sharp knock at the door, and upon opening it I found upon the hall floor an envelope addressed to myself. There was no one anywhere in the hall, and so quickly had I opened the door after the knock, that fact mystified me. It would hardly have been possible for any person, however nimble of foot, to have passed out of sight in the period which had elapsed between the summons and my response. "What is it?" asked Parton, observing that I was slightly agitated. "Nothing," I said, desirous of concealing from him the matter that bothered me, lest I should be laughed at for my pains. "Nothing except a letter for me." "Not by post, is it?" he queried, to which he added, "Can't be. There is no mail here today. Some friend?" "I don't know," I said, trying in a somewhat feminine fashion to solve the authorship of the letter before opening it by staring at the superscription. "I don't recognise the handwriting at all." I then opened the letter, and glancing hastily at the signature was filled with uneasiness to see who my correspondent was. "It's from that fellow Barker," I said. "Barker?" cried Parton. "What on earth has Barker been writing to you about?" "He is in trouble," I replied as I read the letter. "Financial, I presume, and wants a lift?" suggested Parton. "Worse than that," said I. "He is in prison in London." "What?" exclaimed Parton. "In prison in London? What for?" "On suspicion of having murdered an innkeeper in the south of England on Tuesday, August the 16th. "Well, I'm sorry to say that I believe he was guilty," returned Parton, without reflecting that the 16th day of August was the day upon he and I had first encountered Barker. "That's your prejudice, Jack," said I. "If you'll think a minute, you'll know he was innocent. He was here on August the 16th, last Tuesday. It was then that you and I saw him for the first time limping along the road and bleeding from a wound in the shoulder." "Was Tuesday the 16th? said Parton, counting the days backward on his fingers. "That's a fact, it was. But it's none of my affair anyhow. It's too blessed queer for me to mix myself up in it, and I say let him languish in jail. He deserved it for something, I'm sure." "Well, I am not so confoundedly heartless," I returned, pounding the table with my fist, indignant that Parton should allow his prejudices to run away with his sense of justice. "I'm going to London to do as he asks." "What does he want you to do? Prove an alibi?" "Precisely. And I'm going, and you're going, and I shall see if the landlord here won't let me take one of his boys along to support our testimony, at my own expense if need be." "Yeah, you're right, old chap," returned Parton, after a moment of internal struggle. "I suppose we really ought to help the fellow out of his scrape. But I'm decidedly averse to getting mixed up in an affair of any kind with a man like Carleton Barker, much less in an affair with murder in it." "Is he specific about the murder?" "No. He refers me to the London papers of the 17th and 18th for details. He hadn't time to write more, because he comes up for examination on Tuesday morning, and as our presence is essential to his case, he was necessarily hurried." "It's deucedly hard luck for us," said Parton ruefully. "It means no Scotland this trip." "How about Barker's luck?" I asked. He isn't fighting for a Scottish trip, he's fighting for his life.
And so it happened that on Monday morning, instead of starting for Edinburgh, we boarded the train for London at Carlisle. We tried to get copies of the newspapers containing accounts of the crime that had been committed, but our efforts were unavailing, and it was not until we arrived in London and were visited by Barker's attorneys that we obtained any detailed information whatsoever of the murder. And when we did get it, we were more than ever regretful to be mixed up in it, for it was an unusually brutal murder. Strange to say, the evidence against Barker was extraordinarily convincing, considering that at the time of the commission of the crime he was hundreds of miles away from the scene. There was testimony from railway guards, neighbours of the murdered innkeeper, and others that it was Barker and no one else who committed the crime. His identification was complete, and the wound in his shoulder was shown almost beyond the possibility of doubt to have been inflicted by the murdered man in self-defence. "Our only hope," said the attorney gravely, "is in proving an alibi. I do not know what to believe myself. The chain of evidence against my client is so complete, and yet he asserts his innocence, and has stated to me that you two gentlemen could assist in proving it. If you actually encountered Carleton Barker in the neighbourhood of Keswick on the 16th of this month, the whole case against him falls to the ground. If not, I fear his outlook has the gallows at the small end of the perspective." "We certainly did meet a Carleton Barker at Keswick on Tuesday, August 16th, returned Parton, "and he was wounded in the shoulder, and his appearance was what might have been expected of one who had just been through such a frightful murder as we understand this to have been. But this was explained to us as due to a fall over rocks in the vicinity of the Scales Tarn, which was plausible enough to satisfy my friend here." "And not yourself?" queried the attorney. "Well, I don't see what that has to do with it," returned Parton. "As to the locality, there is no question. He was there. We saw him, and others saw him, and we have taken the trouble to come down here to state the fact, and have brought with us the call boy from the hotel, who can support our testimony if it is not regarded as sufficient. I advise you, however, as attorney for Barker, not to inquire too deeply into that matter, because I am convinced that if he isn't guilty of this crime, as of course he is not, he hasn't the cleanest record in the world. He has bad written on every line of his face, and there were one or two things connected with our meeting with him that mightn't be to his taste to have mentioned in court." "I don't need advice, thank you," said the attorney dryly. "I wish simply to establish the fact of his presence at Keswick at the hour of 5 p.m. on Tuesday, August 16th. That was the hour at which the murder is supposed, in fact is proved, to have been committed. At 5:30, according to witnesses, my client was seen in the neighbourhood, faint with loss of blood from a knife wound in the shoulder. Barker has the knife wound, but he might have a dozen of them and be acquitted if he wasn't in Frunton on the day in question. You may rely upon us to prove that," said I. "We will swear to it. We can produce tangible objects presented to us on that afternoon by Barker." "I can't produce mine," said Parton. "I threw it into the lake." "Well, I can produce the stone he gave me," said I, "and I'll do it if you wish." "That will be sufficient, I think," returned the attorney. "Barker spoke especially about that stone, for it was half of an odd souvenir of the East where he was born, and he fortunately has the other half. The two will fit together at the point where the break was made, and our case will be complete." The attorney then left us. The following day we appeared at the preliminary examination, which proved to be the whole examination as well, since, despite the damning circumstantial evidence against Barker, evidence which shook my belief almost in the veracity of my own eyes, our plain statements, substantiated by the evidence of the call boy and the two halves of the oriental pebble, one in my possession and the other in Barker's, brought about the discharge of the prisoner from custody.
and the Frunton atrocity became one of many horrible murders, the mystery of which time alone, if anything, could unravel. After Barker was released, he came to me and thanked me most effusively for the service rendered him, and in many ways made himself agreeable during the balance of our stay in London. Parton, however, would have nothing to do with him, and to me most of his attentions were paid. He always had a singularly uneasy way about him, as though he were afraid of some impending trouble, and finally, after a day spent with him slumming about London, and a more perfect slummer no one ever saw, for he was apparently familiar with every one of the worst and lowest resorts in all of London, as well as on intimate terms with leaders in the criminal world, I put a few questions to him, impertinently pertinent to himself. He was surprisingly frank in his answers. I was quite prepared for a more or less indignant refusal when I asked him to account for his intimacy with these dregs of civilization. "It's a long story," he said, "but I'll tell it to you. Let us run in here and have a chop, and I'll give you some account of myself over a mug of ale." We entered one of the numerous small eating houses that make London a delight to the lover of the chop in the fullness of its glory. When we were seated and the luncheon ordered, Barker began. "I have led a very unhappy life. I was born in India 39 years ago, and while my every act has been as open and free of wrong as are those of an infant, I have constantly been beset by such untoward affairs as this in which you have rendered such inestimable service. At the age of 5, in Calcutta, I was in peril of my liberty on the score of depravity, although I never committed any act that could in any sense be called depraved. The main cause of my trouble at that time was a small girl of 10 whose sight was partially destroyed by the fiendish act of someone who, according to her statement, wantonly hurled a piece of broken glass into one of her eyes. The girl said it was I who did it, although at the time it was done, according to my mother's testimony, I was playing in her room and in her plain view. That alone would not have been a very serious matter for me, because the injured child might have been herself responsible for her injury, but in a childish spirit of fear, afraid to say so, and not realizing the enormity of the charge, have laid it at the door of any one of her playmates she saw fit. She stuck to her story, however, and there were many who believed that she spoke the truth, and that my mother, in an endeavour to keep me out of trouble, had stated what was not true. "But you were innocent, of course?" I said. "I am sorry you think it necessary to ask that," he replied, his pallid face flushing with a not unnatural indignation. "And I decline to answer it," he added. "I have made a practice of late, when I am in trouble or in any way under suspicion, to let others do my pleading and prove my innocence. But you didn't mean to be like your friend Parton, I know, and I cannot be angry with a man who has done so much for me as you have, so let it pass. I was saying that standing alone the accusation of that young girl would not have been serious in its effects in view of my mother's testimony, had not a seeming corroboration come 3 days later, when another child was reported to have been pushed over an embankment and maimed for life by no less a person than my poor innocent self. This time I was again on my mother's testimony at her side, but there were witnesses of the crime, and they, every one of them, swore to my guilt, and as a consequence we found it advisable to leave the home that had been ours since my birth and come to England. My father had contemplated returning to his own country for some time, and the reputation that I had managed unwittingly to build up for myself in Calcutta was of a sort that made it easier for him to make up his mind. He at first swore that he would ferret out the mystery in the matter, and would go through Calcutta with a dragnet if necessary to find the possible other boy who so resembled me that his outrageous acts were put upon my shoulders. but people had begun to make up their minds that there was not only something wrong about me, but that my mother knew it and had tried to get me out of my scrapes by lying. So there was nothing for us to do but leave.
And you never solved the mystery? I queried.
Well, not exactly, returned Barker, gazing abstractedly before him. Not exactly, but I have a theory, based upon the bitterest kind of experience, that I know what the trouble is.
You have a double? I asked.
You are a good guesser, he replied, and of all unhanged criminals he is the very worst.
There was a strange smile on his lips as Carleton Barker said this. His tone was almost that of one who was boasting. In fact, so strongly was I impressed with his appearance of conceit when he estimated the character of his double, that I felt bold enough to say, "You seem to be a little proud of it, in spite of all." Barker laughed.
"I can't help it, though he has kept me on tenterhooks for a lifetime," he said. "We all feel a certain amount of pride in the success of those to whom we are related, either by family ties or other shackles like those in which I am bound to my murderous alter ego. I knew an Englishman once who was so impressed with the notion that he resembled the great Napoleon that he conceived the most ardent hatred for his own country for having sent the illustrious Frenchman to St. Helena. The same influence, a very subtle one, I feel. Here is a man who has maimed and robbed and murdered for years and has never yet been apprehended. In his chosen calling he has been successful, and though I have been put to my trumps many a time to save my neck from the retribution that should have been his, I can't help admiring the fellow, though I'd kill him if he stood before me."
"And are you making any effort to find him?"
"I am, of course," said Barker. "That has been my life work. I am fortunately possessed of means enough to live on, so that I can devote all my time to unravelling the mystery. It is for this reason that I have acquainted myself with the element of London with which, as you have noticed, I am very familiar. The life these criminals are leading is quite as revolting to me as it is to you, and the scenes you and I have witnessed together are no more unpleasant to you than they are to me. But what can I do? The man lives and must be run down. He is in England, I am certain. This latest diversion of his has convinced me of that."
"Well," said I, rising,
"you certainly have my sympathy, Mr. Barker, and I hope your efforts will meet with success. I trust you will have the pleasure of seeing the other gentleman hanged."
"Thank you," he said, with a queer look in his eyes, which, as I thought it over afterwards, did not seem to be quite as appropriate to his expression of gratitude as it might have been. Chapter 3. When Barker and I parted that day, it was for a longer period than either of us dreamed, for upon my arrival at my lodgings I found there a cable message from New York, calling me back to my labours. 3 days later I sailed for home, and 5 years elapsed before I was so fortunate as to renew my acquaintance with foreign climes. Occasionally through these years Parton and I discussed Barker, and at no time did my companion show anything but an increased animosity towards our strange Keswick acquaintance. The mention of his name was sufficient to drive Parton from the height of exuberance to a state of abject depression. "I shall not feel easy while that man lives," he said. "I think he is a minion of Satan. There is nothing earthly about him." "Nonsense," said I. "Just because a man has a bad face is no reason for supposing him a villain or a supernatural creature." "No," Parton answered, "but when a man's veins hold blood that saturates and leaves no stain, what are we to think?" I confess that this was a point beyond me, and by mutual consent we dropped the subject.
One night, Parton came to my rooms white as a sheet, and so agitated that for a few minutes he could not speak. He dropped, shaking like a leaf, into my reading chair and buried his face in his hands. His attitude was that of one frightened to the very core of his being. When I questioned him first, he did not respond. He simply groaned. I resumed my reading for a few moments, and then, looking up, observed that Parton had recovered somewhat and was now gazing abstractedly into the fire. "Well?" I said. "Feeling better?" "Yes," he answered slowly, "but it was a shock." "What was?" I asked. "You've told me nothing as yet." "I've seen Barker." "No!" I cried. "Where?" "In a back alley downtown, where I had to go on a hospital call. There was a row in a gambling hell in Hester Street. 2 men were cut and I had to go with the ambulance. Both men will probably die, and no one can find any trace of the murderer, but I know who he is. He was Carleton Barker and no one else. I passed him in the alley on the way in, and I saw him in the crowd when I came out." "Was he alone in the alley?" I asked. Parton groaned again. "That's the worst of it," he said. "He was not alone. He was with Carleton Barker." "You speak in riddles," said I. "I saw in riddles," said Parton. "For as truly as I sit here, there were 2 of them, and they stood side by side as I passed through, alike as 2 peas, and crime written on the pallid face of each." "Did Barker recognize you?" "I think so, for as I passed he gasped. Both of them gasped, and as I stopped to speak to the one I had first recognized, he had vanished as completely as though he had never been, and as I turned to address the other, he was shambling off into the darkness as far as his legs could carry him." I was stunned. Barker had been mysterious enough in London. In New York, with his double, and again connected with an atrocity, he became even more so, and I began to feel somewhat towards him as had Parton from the first. The papers next morning were not very explicit on the subject of the Hester Street trouble, but they confirmed Parton's suspicions in his and my own mind as to whom the assassins were. The accounts published simply stated that the wounded men, one of whom had died in the night and the other of whom would doubtless not live through the day, had been set upon and stabbed by 2 unknown Englishmen who had charged them with cheating at cards, that the assailants had disappeared, and that the police had no clue as to the whereabouts. Time passed, and nothing further came to light concerning the Barkers, and gradually Parton and I came to forget them. The following summer I went abroad again, and then came the climax to the Barker episode, as we called it. I can best tell the story of that climax by printing here a letter written by myself to Parton. It was penned within an hour of the supreme moment, and while it evidences my own mental perturbation in its lack of coherence, it is none the less an absolutely truthful account of what happened. The letter is as follows. London, July the 18th. My dear Parton, you once said to me that you could not breathe easily while this world held Carleton Barker living. You may now draw an easy breath, and many of them, for the Barker episode is over. Barker is dead, and I flatter myself that I am doing very well myself to live sanely after the experiences of this morning. About a week after my arrival in England, a horrible tragedy was enacted in the Seven Dials district. A woman was the victim, and a devil in human form the perpetrator of the crime. The poor creature was literally hacked to pieces in a manner suggesting the hand of Jack the Ripper, but in this instance the murderer, unlike Jack, was caught red-handed, and turned out to be no less a person than Carleton Barker. He was tried and convicted, and sentenced to be hanged at 12 o'clock today. When I heard of Barker's trouble, I went, as a matter of curiosity solely, to the trial, and discovered in the dock the man you and I had encountered at Keswick. That is to say, he resembled our friend in every possible respect. If he were not Barker, he was the most perfect imitation of Barker conceivable. Not a feature of our Barker but was reproduced in this one, even to the name. But he failed to recognize me. He saw me, I know, because I felt his eyes upon me, but in trying to return his gaze, I quailed utterly before him. I could not look him in the eye without a feeling of the most deadly horror, but I did see enough of him to note that he regarded me only as one of 1,000 spectators who had flocked into the courtroom during the progress of the trial. If it were our Barker who sat there, his dissemblance was remarkable. So coldly did he look at me that I began to doubt if he were really the man we had met. But the events of this morning have changed my mind utterly on that point. He was the one we had met, and I am now convinced that his story to me of his double was purely fictitious, and that from beginning to end there has been but one Barker. The trial was a speedy one. There was nothing to be said in behalf of the prisoner, and within 5 days of his arraignment he was convicted and sentenced to the extreme penalty, that of hanging. And noon today was the hour appointed for the execution. I was to have gone to Richmond today by coach, but since Barker's trial I have been in a measure depressed. I have grown to dislike the man as thoroughly as did you, and yet I was very much affected by the thought that he was finally to meet death upon the scaffold. I could not bring myself to participate in any pleasures on the day of his execution, and in consequence I gave up my Richmond journey and remained all morning in my lodgings trying to read. It was a miserable effort. I could not concentrate my mind upon my book. No book could have held the slightest part of my attention at that time. My thoughts were all for Carleton Barker, and I doubt if, when the clock hands pointed to 11:30, Barker himself was more apprehensive over what was to come than I. I found myself holding my watch in my hand, gazing at the dial and counting the seconds which must intervene before the last dreadful scene of a life of crime. I would rise from my chair and pace my room nervously for a few minutes. Then I would throw myself into my chair again and stare at my watch. This went on nearly all the morning, in fact until 10 minutes before 12, when there came a slight knock at my door. I put aside my nervousness as well I could, and, walking to the door, opened it. I wonder that I have nerve to write of it, Parton, but there upon the threshold, clad in the deepest black, his face pallid as the head of death itself and his hands shaking like those of a palsied man, stood no less a person than Carleton Barker. I staggered back in amazement, and he followed me, closing the door and locking it behind him. "What would you do?" I cried, regarding his act with alarm, for candidly I was almost abject with fear. "Nothing to you," he said. You have been as far as you could be my friend. The other, your companion of Keswick, meaning you, of course, was my enemy." "I was glad you were not with us, my dear Parton. I should have trembled for your safety." "How have you managed to escape?" I asked. "I have not escaped," returned Barker, "but I shall soon be free from my accursed double." Here he gave an unearthly laugh and pointed to the clock. "Ha ha!" he cried. 5 minutes more, and I shall be free." "Then the man in the dock was not you?" I asked. "The man in the dock," he answered slowly, "is even now mounting the gallows, whilst I stand here." He trembled a little as he spoke, and lurched forward like a drunken man, but he soon recovered himself, grasping the back of my chair convulsively with his long white fingers. In 2 minutes more, he whispered, the rope will be adjusted about his neck. The black cap is even now being drawn over his cursed features, and... Here he shrieked with laughter, and rushing to the window, thrust his head out and literally sucked the air into his lungs, as a man with a parched throat would have drunk water. Then he turned, and tottering back to my side, hoarsely demanded some brandy. It was fortunately at hand, and precisely as the big bells in Westminster began to sound the hour of noon, he caught up the goblet and held it aloft. "To him!" he cried. And then, Parton, standing before me in my lodgings, as truly as I write, he remained fixed and rigid until the 12th stroke of the bells sounded, when he literally faded from my sight, and the goblet, falling to the floor, was shattered into countless atoms. The end. Ooh. We do like a good old doppelganger story. Is it actually a thing that doppelgangers, in theory, can't be separated? I know, obviously, if if you view your doppelganger, you die, basically. But yeah, I quite like that one. In the sense that it's just like, no one's entirely sure what was going on there. Spooky. Oh, excuse me. Spooky indeed. Yes, I also like the title, Carleton Barker, First and Second. You know, zero actual folklore about doppelgangers. Yeah, me too. I don't know either. Yes, me neither. But yes, I very much hope you enjoyed that. I did. They were 3 good stories. Some fun subjects. But yes, I don't think I shall raid tonight because I'm quite tired. Yes, thank you all very much for being here. Probably won't be no stream on Saturday. But we shall be back next week, possibly Monday. Maybe we'll do a Monday stream because I don't think we've done one this month yet. I shall work that out with Sam, but definitely back next Wednesday. Oh, excuse me, for more good stories. But yes, thank you all very much for being here. Go take care of yourselves. Have a good rest of your days, and we shall see you all again soon. Thank you very much, and good night.